Constantinople, or as I like to call it, the truck stop of the ancient world. Founded in 324 AD, the capital of the Byzantine Empire quickly rose to fame as one of the richest cities in the Mediterranean, thanks to its ideal location on the crossroads of the major trade routes at the time. It's suspected that at its height, more than 1 million people lived in Constantinople, and even though that might not seem super impressive in the modern day, it was a pretty big deal in the 6th century. But even more important than the city itself were the great people who made it the way it was. Influential emperors like Justinian I and Constantine the Great, important religious figures like this asshole. But I digress. If you're like me, you might have been reading chapter 6 and thinking to yourself, yeah, this is great, these dudes did some cool stuff I guess, but where are all the women? So in this video, I will be going in depth about the 2 female figures of Byzantine history that are mentioned in our text, Theodora I and Irene of Athens. Theodora was born between 497 and 500 AD, depending on who you ask. There's no real concrete record of her place of birth, either. According to books about her written at the time, she was either born in Cyprus, Syria, or an ancient area of the Black Sea's coast called Paphlagonia. She was born to a Cassius, a bear trainer for the Hippodrome's Green faction, and a dancer and actress whose name was never recorded. She had 2 sisters, an older named Comito and a younger named Anastasia. When Theodora was around 12 years old, she followed in the footsteps of her sister Comito and became an actress, first serving as Comito's assistant, but soon getting her own parts in plays due to her charisma and ability to make people laugh. However, the Byzantine idea of an actress was a little different than it is today. Along with performing in plays, being an actress involved some degree of stripping along with performing sexual services off stage. Procopius's Secret History states that Theodora also worked at a brothel during this period of her life, but without opening that can of worms, Secret History is a biased source. At age 16, she traveled to North Africa with a Syrian official named Hesebelus. He eventually abandoned her, and on the way back to Byzantine, she settled in Alexandria, Egypt. She returned to Constantinople in the year 522 and took on a job as a wool spinner near the palace. The charm and wit that had won her roles as an actor also won her the heart of Justinian I, who wanted to marry her. However, Euphemia, the empress at the time, and Justinian's aunt forbid their marriage, citing a Roman law stating that government officials could not marry actresses. Which seems super specific to this exact situation, but whatever you say, Euphemia. Once Empress Euphemia died, Justinian repealed the law and married Theodora. Theodora quickly proved herself to be a skilled leader, particularly during the Nika riots of 532. Prompted by unresolved negative feelings towards the government, including Justinian and Theodora themselves, a mob of citizens set many public buildings on fire and announced a new emperor, a man named Hypatius. Justinian and the government council were preparing to flee the city, but Theodora spoke out against this plan. She said it was more noble to die as a ruler than to live on in exile. This convinced Justinian not to run and instead to send out royal troops to attack the demonstrators at the Hippodrome and get the riot under control. Hypatius was also put to death at Theodora's insistence, despite claiming to have been elected emperor against his will. Yikes. After the riots, Theodora assisted in the rebuilding and reforming of Constantinople. She assisted in the construction of aqueducts, bridges, and over 25 new churches, the most well-known being the Hagia Sophia. In addition to this, she also made numerous reforms to increase women's rights in the Byzantine Empire. She shut down brothels and passed laws prohibiting non-consensual prostitution, then built a convent called the Metanoia where ex-prostitutes could support themselves. She gave women more property and divorce rights, implemented the death penalty for rape, gave women guardianship rights over their children, and outlawed murdering a wife who had committed adultery. A lot of this stuff was pretty crazy progressive for the time. Even Procopius said that Theodora was naturally inclined to assist women in misfortune. Theodora died on June 28, 548, of what was at the time described as just cancer, though later accounts say it was most likely breast cancer. She was around 48 years old. After her death, she continued to influence the Byzantine Empire through her husband, who outlived her by nearly 20 years. Even in today's day and age, Theodora's fascinating life story permeates our media, with numerous books, films, stage productions, and video games featuring her in the tales of her rule. She even has a place at Judy Chicago's dinner party. Irene of Athens, also known as Irene Sarantapetiana, was born in 752 in, well, Athens. She was an orphan and almost nothing is known about her parents. However, her uncle or cousin, it's unclear, Constantine Sarantapetros was a military general. Not much is known about her early life, but in November 768, when she was 16, she was brought to Constantinople by Emperor Constantine V. She was married to his son, Leo IV, a month later. Though she appears to have come from a noble family, other than this, there's no real reason she would have been chosen to be Leo's bride, which leads historians to believe she may have been part of a bride show. In January of 771, she gave birth to a son who would later become Constantine VI. Her husband came into rule at age 25 after the death of Constantine V. He was an iconoclast, meaning a person who was against the use of religious icons, and during his rule, he slowly implemented harsher and harsher punishments regarding the worship of such icons. It is reported that he discovered religious iconography among Irene's possessions, and in response to this, refused to share a bed with her for the rest of his life. So this guy meant business. His rule only lasted for 5 years, and once he died, Irene became empress regent for her son. Simply put, a regent is a person who rules in the place of a monarch because said monarch is incapable of ruling in some way. Irene's son was only 9 years old at the time of Leo IV's death, so she got put on the throne instead. However, almost as soon as she was announced as regent, people were trying to get her out of there. A plan was formed to try and get Leo IV's half-brother Nikephoros to be emperor instead. To combat this, Irene ordained Nikephoros and his accomplices as priests, which means they would be ineligible to rule. As regent, Irene sought to mend and strengthen relationships with other groups, such as the papacy in Rome and the Carolingian Empire. She negotiated a marriage between her son and Rotrud, one of Charlemagne's daughters, and subdued a Sicilian rebellion. Her most iconic achievement was, as mentioned in the text, the ending of iconoclasm. She restored the veneration of icons and reunited the Eastern Orthodox Church with the Roman Church. In the meantime, Irene's son, Constantine VI, was becoming an adult and began to grow restless with his mother's rule as regent. He wanted to take his place on the throne, but Irene refused. This led to discontent among the people, which eventually grew into an organized army of soldiers that proclaimed Constantine to be the true leader of the Byzantine Empire and arrested Irene. Though on the surface Constantine remained friendly with his mother, even pardoning her and letting her out of jail, the tension between them grew, climaxing in 792 when Irene was officially promoted from regent to empress. This led to outrage within the empire, and it soon became clear that things would not change unless one of them were to be taken out of the picture. Irene soon got her chance to make this happen in 1796, when Constantine caused a scandal by divorcing his wife in order to marry his mistress, Theodote. Taking advantage of this, Irene organized a plan in 797 with the aid of her various bishops and courtiers. She had Constantine captured, arrested, and blinded by having his eyes gouged out. This is her own son, by the way. Anyway, Constantine died of his injuries a few days later. Though Irene was no longer in danger of losing the throne to her son, outside forces continued to threaten her. The Carolingian Empire in West Europe was quickly expanding under the rule of Charlemagne. The Carolingian Empire was doing so well under him, in fact, that in 1800, Pope Leo III, that asshole from before, crowned him as Holy Roman Emperor. Though he made no direct claim to the Byzantine Empire, it is implied that his position as Holy Roman Emperor overshadowed Irene's rule in Byzantine, but it's sort of unclear. Anyway, the justification Pope Leo III had for all of this was that he felt the position of ruler was actually vacant because Irene wasn't fit to rule. And despite all of the possibly valid reasons she shouldn't be able to rule, such as being totally okay with gouging her son's eyes out, Leo's reasoning was that it was because she was a woman. This, unfortunately, was a reasoning shared by the majority of the Roman Empire. Though Irene continued to sit on the throne, it was more as a formality, as the actual power she held decreased significantly. In 1802, taking advantage of Irene's weakened power, the patricians were at last successful in their plan to put Nikephoros on the throne. Irene was exiled from the Byzantine Empire and fled to the island of Lesbos, but jokes about my sexuality aside, she supported herself by spinning wool and died the following year of an unrecorded cause. Irene's story, unfortunately, has not been preserved in our history as well as Theodora's has. And yet, without getting too deep here, I think she serves as a good counterpoint to Theodora. Even though Theodora did so much for women in the empire, Byzantine was no feminist paradise. Irene's time as a ruler was constantly overshadowed by men trying to thwart her, even her own son. In conclusion, we all know that history is written by the victors, and for better or for worse, time and time again the victors have been men. But when men write all our history, we can sometimes leave women behind. I didn't even know who Theodora and Irene were before reading chapter 6, and even then I only really knew their names. In the wise words of First Lady Abigail Adams, if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion. Thank you for watching.